It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you could find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. If you just shoot me an email at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. This book, the ink is not even dry yet. It's coming out June 4th, 2024. You can get a pre-order if you go to Amazon. Mafia Spies, the inside story of the CIA, Gangsters, JFK, and Castro. All the stuff that's right up our alley over here at the Opperman Report. So I know you guys are going to love this stuff here. And our guest, Thomas Maier, there's going to be a 6-part series on Paramount. It's going to come out to July 16th. And then after that, it's going to be on Showtime. So there's going to be a whole TV series about this thing, too, as well. You can find Thomas Maier at thomasmaierbooks.com and also on Twitter at Thomas Maier. That's M-A-I-E-R, Thomas Maier. Mr. Maier, are you there?
Yes. Hi, Ed. How are you? Thanks for inviting me.
No, thank you so much, and I've enjoyed our talk off the air so far. Explain to the audience, who is Thomas Maier?
Thomas Maier is a reporter, journalist, and TV producer. I have been a reporter for many, many moons. I was a reporter for Newsday, the newspaper here in New York, for 40 years. I ended my last year, which I just finished up, was as a editorial columnist for the newspaper. But for the last 25, 30 years, I've been writing a series of books about America in our time, primarily biographies. So I've written about the Kennedys, I've written about Churchill, I've written about Dr. Spock, the baby doctor. I've wrote about Masters and Johnson, the sex researchers. That became a TV show on Showtime. And now I've written Mafia Spies, which is going to be a 6-part series on Paramount Plus. And then the week later, it'll be shown sequentially, in other words, episode by episodes, on Showtime. So I'm really thrilled about that. That's been 5 years in the making, just the TV show itself. And I'm a part of it, and there's a number of journalists and historians who are in it, and there's also recreations that are really terrific that were filmed at the Paramount lot. So I'm really looking forward to the show, and I think people could get a real jump on the show by getting the book and reading it and being aware of what the story is all about.
Yeah, I'd love to have you come back about Dr. Spock and also Masters and Johnson, 2 great historical topics. That's right up my alley over here. But you were telling me you got a novel coming out, Montauk to Manhattan?
I do. During COVID, I was writing a book that I had to put aside because of COVID. So I decided to write a novel, and the novel is called Montauk to Manhattan, and that comes out July 9th. But you can also pre-order. And the story is about it's kind of based upon some real life themes. But even though it's a novel, it's about a newspaper reporter who writes a book, historical novel that becomes a TV show. The novel doesn't go anywhere, but the TV show is filmed out in Montauk. And during the course of that filming, an actress goes missing. And so it's a book that deals with everything from Me Too Hollywood, some of the sexual harassment, to the media itself. The reporter who writes the book, it's the summer of 2016 when they're filming, and so he's covering for a well-known newspaper the rise of Donald Trump. He's one of the reporters covering that. And also it deals with one of the biggest scandals in Native American history. It's about how the Long Island Railroad essentially stole the properties of the Montauk Indians, and that's kind of like the basis for the historical novel. That's the basis of the TV show. So it's got a lot of things going on. Fundamentally, it's a fun murder mystery with a lot of themes running through it.
Hey, so maybe when they make a series out of that one, they'll get Tom Cruise to play Thomas Maier. How's that? Tell us about Mafia Spies, the inside story of CIA, Gangsters, JFK, and Castro.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I was writing, we were doing the TV show Masters of Sex about love and sex, and I really wanted to do something on the completely other end of the spectrum of human emotions. And so this is about violence. It's about state-sanctioned assassination. It's about the random violence of crazy, psychopathic violence of the mafia. And Mafia Spies, in a nutshell, is about two gangsters named Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana, who were hired by the CIA to kill Fidel Castro, who was then the head of the communist state of Cuba. And this is all during the Cold War. And so the story is about what happens to them and how they get murdered and some of the reasons for that. So that, in a nutshell, is what Mafia Spies is all about.
But you also got in the mix here the Rat Pack and Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, it sure does. Well, let's talk about for a moment the two main characters, Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana. Sam Giancana was the head of the Chicago mob. So a lot about the mafia is told through Sam. But Johnny Roselli was the mob's guy in Hollywood. So he was a fixer in Hollywood. He dealt with a lot of studio heads like Harry Cohn at Columbia. And through that, Johnny was also a very handsome guy. In fact, he was known as Handsome Johnny. So it was remarkable to me just some of the people that Johnny met in his social life. We dated, actually, actresses like Lana Turner, Donna Reed, believe it or not, from It's a Wonderful Life. But he was also very friendly with Marilyn Monroe, and he actually dated Monroe, but he was also part of the Hollywood crowd that moves to Las Vegas when the mob is moving into Las Vegas. This is around the 40s and the 50s, after World War II. And Johnny is the guy for the Chicago mob that is overseeing the move into Las Vegas. And he and then Sam Giancana, eventually, they become part of the crowd with Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack. And so I explored a lot of the impact of these two mobsters on the Rat Pack itself, particularly Frank Sinatra. If you look at the FBI file of Frank Sinatra, as I did for this book, again, Mafia Spies is a completely true, verified conspiracy story. In fact, the CIA confirmed it. But if you look at the FBI files of both Sam Giancana and Frank Sinatra, there's a lot of talk about Sinatra's connections to Giancana and Johnny Roselli. And it's through that connection in Las Vegas that Sinatra becomes acquainted with one of Johnny's girlfriends, a woman named Judy Campbell. And Judy, later known as Judy Campbell Exner, she has an affair first with Johnny, and then she has an affair with Frank Sinatra. But then Sinatra introduces her to a young senator by the name of John F. Kennedy. This is in the late 50s, and Kennedy, of course, is planning to run in 1960 for President of the United States. And during this time, out in Las Vegas, he begins a 2-year affair with Judy Campbell. And during that time period, she's also courted by Sam Giancana. And the FBI, which is running after the mafia, becomes aware of this. So it is a very complicated but really amazing story about the Rat Pack and these two mobsters and what was going on during this time period.
Yeah, weren't there like wiretaps all over the place showing up with all these characters?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things. See, the FBI in Chicago would install listening devices into Giancana's headquarters in Chicago. So they were able to listen into a number of different things. They also there was also a listening device that was put in by Sam Giancana and the CIA in Las Vegas, and that had to do with the fact that Sam Giancana was also going out with a pretty well-known singer by the name of Phyllis Maier.
Sure.
And Sam was a very jealous sort. In fact, people who had tried to court some of his girlfriends wound up dead. There's a famous case in Chicago where the guy suddenly went missing when he. But in any event, the two mobsters were working down in Florida with the CIA, helping to train and get involved with Cuban exiles in the attempts to kill Fidel Castro. So this is going on in Florida. But what happens is that Sam hears that his girlfriend, Phyllis Maier, is being courted by a comedian by the name of Dan Rowan, later of the Rowan Martin's Laughing, for those who remember that show. And this is all going on in Las Vegas. So Sam finds out. He's furious. But the CIA wants him to stay in Florida with Johnny in training. So what they do is they say, we'll send a private eye that we know in Las Vegas, and we'll bug the room, we'll wiretap the room of Dan Rowan to find out whether or not
he's sleeping with Maier. I remember this story. Yeah.
Exactly, an affair with that. And the security guards in the hotel in Las Vegas catch wind of this. They stop it. They call the cops. The cops call in the FBI, and the FBI is trying to figure out. So why is this going on? And they learn about the CIA, the very secret CIA operation that's going on involving these two mobsters, Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli, in Florida. And it goes from there. That's where the FBI finds out about this thing, and the FBI head, J. Edgar Hoover, is more than happy to find out the dirt on JFK and what was going on with this woman, Judy Campbell. So it's a lot of different characters in the book. That's why I say read the book. It really does clearly explain and expand upon all the different characters, all the different plots in this book. Fundamentally, it's about the attempts by two gangsters hired by the CIA to kill Castro, but surrounding it are all these subplots.
Yeah, what a wild time in history, right? Just what a wild time.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, that's what attracted me to the story. I had done previously a biography of the Kennedy family, in which I did mention briefly the affairs of JFK. I mentioned it just briefly, but I also worked as a young reporter in Chicago at the Chicago Sun-Times. And I do remember covering the killing of a pretty prominent mobster by the name of Alan Dorfman. And so I've always been interested in Giancana and the mafia of that time period. But it was the addition of Johnny Roselli and realizing the friendship between Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli and how they were very different men. And that also kind of what intrigued me. Sam was the head of the mafia in Chicago. They told the consiglieres for the outfit, as the mafia is known in Chicago, told Giancana, okay, we're going to give you the reins, but we want you to keep your profile low. And at that time, he had been a married man with 3 teenage daughters. He was a suburban guy who would cut his own lawn and such. His wife dropped dead, screaming at their oldest daughter, who actually is in the show, believe it or not, Antoinette Giancana. And Sam...
Wait, she's going to be on this Paramount series you produced?
Yeah, Antoinette, Sam's daughter.
Oh, how cool is that?
Giancana.
Yeah.
Oh, arguably, she's the star of the show.
Okay, great.
She's terrific.
Yeah.
She's hilarious.
Well, I guess you had to let her be the star, right? You had no choice. They should offer,
yeah.
right?
Well, if you go way back, there was a TV show about her on NBC back in the 80s called Mafia Princess. And in fact, that book was written by a friend of mine from Newsday many, many years ago. This is 40 years ago. But Antoinette is still alive. Tony Giancana, and she's great in this TV show, the Paramount show this July. She's just really terrific. So, anyway, so I know I wander around here, but fundamentally it's about this big operation by the CIA with these 2 gangsters. And as much as Giancana, when his wife dies, he's kind of like lost, and that's why he goes out to Las Vegas. And he hangs out with Johnny Roselli. And this is where Sam meets the actress Phyllis McGuire. But Johnny Roselli, as I mentioned, he was known as Handsome Johnny, and he knew all these actresses and such. But he was a different type of guy. He was married for about 5 minutes or so to an actress, and I think he wanted her to stay home and cook lasagna or whatever it is that he wanted, but, to stay home. And she thought it was really a good career move to get married to this mafia guy who was the fixer for all of the Hollywood studio heads. But that marriage did not last very long. And Johnny Roselli, as I mentioned, dated all these actresses. He was a Casanova type. So I in terms of writing this book, I was very intrigued about these 2 archetypes of men. Sam, who's the married guy whose wife dies suddenly and he's kind of lost, and he's looking for a new woman that he can adore while also having a girlfriend on the side. But he's kind of like lost. He likes being married. And Johnny, who's kind of a smooth Casanova guy, but he doesn't treat women as playthings as much as he does as he just really likes women, and the women really like him. And so it was really interesting, the 2 different characters in Mafia Spies, and I played off a lot with that. The other thing is with particularly Sam Giancana, when they're in Las Vegas, it's interesting how Giancana kind of influences Frank Sinatra. Sinatra in the 40s was kind of a boy singer with a kind of a light, soft, sweet voice. A lot of his songs are very sweet in the 40s, whereas in the 50s, as he meets Giancana, you can hear that more gangster sound to Sinatra's voice. He's got more of that saloon singer, the guy who, and it's funny when you look at the different hats, particularly the fedoras that they would wear at that time, very similar hats even, but Sinatra loved to hang out with Giancana, both in Las Vegas and also at the Fontainebleau. When the CIA actually has the first big meeting about how they're going to kill Castro, they have a meeting with Johnny Roselli and with Sam Giancana, and it's held at the Fontainebleau Hotel. This is in 1960. At the same time that Frank Sinatra is there filming a TV special with Elvis, who is just fresh off of his service in the Army. So, when you talk about all these characters that are now so famous, it's really remarkable how much they interacted during that time period, particularly the Rat Pack, Sam Giancana, the Mafia connection that was involved at that time.
Now, clearly the organized crime had an interest in removing Castro from Cuba because they had their own casinos down there, their own businesses down there, their own interests down there, and the CIA had their own interests. Who recruited who? Who do you think recruited who to get involved in this?
Well, you have to go back and understand where America was in the late 50s. We were on top of the world. We had won World War II. The Soviets, they did get the bomb eventually, but we had the atomic bomb for 5 years after World War II. And so we were pretty secure there until the late 50s when two things happened. One was the shooting of the Sputnik satellite out into outer space. It's hard to imagine because we send satellites up all the time, but this was the first time anything had ever gone up into space, and it was the Russians who had done it, not us. And so the idea that maybe the Russians could put an atomic bomb on one of these satellites added a whole new thing. There was it really shook official Washington. So that was one factor. The other factor was that Fidel Castro, who overthrew a tyrant, a dictator named Batista, who had been running Cuba, and it was in cahoots with the mob and running. The mob ran their casinos down in Havana. But when Fidel came into power, we first thought he was a reformer. In fact, he came to New York, and the New York Times, all of the newspaper editors invited him to talk. There were stories about it. Castro visited the Bronx Zoo. Everybody loved him, seemingly so. And then we realized that fundamentally he was a communist, and he very quickly aligned himself with the Soviet Union. By that point, we were in a very cold war with Russia. And so those two things really set the stage for why the government wanted to get rid of Castro. The idea that Castro and the Russians could put nuclear missiles in Cuba 90 miles away from the United States was just an unacceptable risk to the United States. So we did two things. One is we trained Cuban exiles who fled Cuba to conduct the Bay of Pigs invasion, which was a disaster. And that was early on. It was something that JFK, as the new president, had inherited. But he okayed it, and they went, but it did not work out. And the reason why it didn't work out is Kennedy, during the invasion, did not want to put U.S. air cover. He didn't want to escalate things into World War III, and so that was a disaster. But the other surreptitious way of trying to overthrow Castro was through assassination, and the CIA did not want to get that. CIA was run by guys from the Ivy League. Alan McDullis, who was the head of the CIA, he had gone to Princeton. This number two had gone to Yale. All these guys, they didn't want to get their hands dirty with assassination directly. What they did was they kind of farmed it out to the mafia, and they put a buffer in between them. They put a guy named Robert Maier, who was working for Howard Hughes, the richest guy in America at that time. But Maier became the buffer, and he's the one on behalf of the CIA who approached the gangsters about the plot to kill Castro.
Gotcha. Okay, and then what kind of attempts did they make on Castro? But by the way, did your research get into Frank Fiorini, Frank Sturgis, and his attempts down there too with the Rita Lorenz and all that stuff?
Oh yeah, we did. In fact, you'll see in the show, the Paramount show, we have a lot of this stuff. And we do take it by the hand. I know we're going through this pretty quickly.
I got 51 minutes. Yeah. That's 6 weeks. Yeah. Yeah.
The show does take you by the hand.
Yeah.
And certainly the book does as well. And I'm very happy about the fact that book does. People can. There's a lot of things going on, but it does explain it in a very point-by-point way, and hopefully in an exciting way for people. But I'm sorry, it just hit me again with that question.
Yes, I was asking if the book touched on Frank Fiorini, Frank Sturgis. Because I actually had because he was in both. He had a foot in both camps of organized crime and the CIA. But what I really wanted to get to after that was what type of assassination attempts did they recruit these fellows to go out down into?
Right. Well, there were a lot of attempts. In fact, Johnny Roselli, who's really the star of Mafia Spies, he was down there training, and at night they would go from these facilities that they had developed in Florida where they were training people. They would get in boats in the middle of the night and go out, and they would essentially attempt to provide arms and other type of explosives to spies who were in Cuba in attempts to assassinate Castro. But the other thing is the two mafia guys in particular tried to recruit people that they had known in Cuba when they were running the casinos there to try to poison Fidel Castro. There was also an attempt to line his Castro liked to scuba dive, and so they put poisons inside a scuba diving outfit on hopes that would somehow poison Castro. So there were numerous attempts to either blow him up, to shoot him from afar, or to poison him, none of which worked. And it was really quite amazing why that was so. And there's a lot of reasons why Castro survived it. Two in particular. One is that through the Russians, Castro learned how to be a spy himself, and he set up very quickly a pretty effective spy network, not only so that he knew what was going on in Cuba, but also there were a number of spies that worked and provided information to Castro, who lived in Florida. And so that was really interesting. And also in terms of double agents, one of the major characters in Mafia Spies is a mobster by the name of Santo Trafficante.
Sure.
He worked out of Tampa. He ran and oversaw a lot of the casinos in Florida for the mob, and he was friendly with both Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli, and in fact, when I talked about that meeting, the initial meeting at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Florida, Santo Trafficante was there along with Sam and Johnny Roselli and the CIA on the plot to kill Castro. However, what I have learned from documents that I was able to get through the recent filing, the recent disclosure of FBI and CIA files related to the JFK assassination, they were released by President Trump around 2017, 2018. In that time period, there were loads of documents, and those documents, they don't provide a lot of definitive information about who killed JFK, but what they do is provide a lot of information about what was going on with the CIA in Florida in regards to trying to kill Castro, and right down to Johnny Roselli's code number. That's how I found out his code number for the CIA. But it also describes what was going on in Florida, and it indicates that Santo Trafficante between the FBI files and the CIA files. That Santo Trafficante essentially was a double agent. Why was he a double agent? Well, because when you're a mobster in Tampa, one of the main sources of money, is drug trafficking. And a lot of drug trafficking would go through Cuba during this time period. And so Trafficante never completely alienated himself from the Cuban regime of Castro, even though he was part of the plot to kill Castro. And so he kind of played both ends of the candle, if you will. And Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana were not aware of this. There was a CIA official, as I described in the book, who became suspicious about Santo Trafficante and kind of cut him out later on in the process. But all of this world of double agents, spies, double agents, and mafia characters, and people with many interests.
Yeah, their own financial interests.
Yeah, it really is amazing.
Yeah.
I people say, well, why wasn't this book done before? And I think part of it is that not all of the story was known. Certainly, it was not known at all when it was happening in the 60s. It became part of the public awareness about 15 years later, when there were hearings in the mid-70s,
right? And
both Johnny Roselli and Giancana were subpoenaed to testify before the Senate about the plot to kill Castro and such. And what happens to them is described in the book, and I'd be happy to talk about that.
Yeah, that's when he's going to start turning up dead, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, why don't you tell us about that?
Well, okay. But basically, just to finish my point, is a lot of this was not known, and so my book, Mafia Spies, takes advantage of a lot of the documents that have become available in more recent years, and when you put it together, almost like a jigsaw puzzle, when you step back, you get a much better sense of what was going on. Now, to talk about what happens to Johnny and Sam, it's really quite remarkable. Sam, as I mentioned before, was told keep a low profile. He was told by the retiring heads of the mob in Chicago, keep a low profile, which Sam does not do. So what Sam does is he's dating Hollywood stars. He's hanging out with Sinatra. So there's all this press attention. It's the last thing that the mob in Chicago wanted from Sam. They wanted him to make a lot of money, and keep a low profile, because they had learned from the example of Al Capone in the 20s that in the 30s, when you invite a lot of attention to the mafia, the FBI comes in, they get embarrassed, and people wind up going to jail, like Al Capone, and even like John Gotti in New York. That was John Gotti. He really invited a lot of attention because of all of the attention by the FBI because of all things that were going on. So by the 70s, in the 1970s, after Watergate, there's a lot of stuff learned about what was going on with the CIA. And so the Senate decided to take a look at the CIA. And lo and behold, they find out that there was a secret plot to kill Fidel Castro involving the mafia, and that it also involved JFK and this woman, Judy Campbell, who by that point was now known as Judy Exner. And so in the mid-70s, Senator Frank Church, who headed this, he was a Democrat who oversaw the Senate Investigations Committee looking at the CIA, they subpoenaed both Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli. And there were two investigators who went out to Chicago to kind of prep Sam Giancana. And that night, Sam Giancana had some people over for dinner. And when they finished dinner, everybody went home. And Sam went down to his little man cave that he had in his house. This is in Oak Park, Illinois. It's a suburb of Chicago. And as he's kind of preparing like a late-night snack, somebody comes in and puts 6 bullets into his head. In fact, the way the bullets are shot, it's around his mouth, which is the mob's way of saying anybody who talks will be killed just like this. Johnny Roselli is looking. There's a secret that involves Johnny Roselli, and it's that that's not his real name. He's an illegal alien. He came over from Italy as a very young man, and he changed his name to Johnny Roselli. It was inspired by a Vatican painter named Roselli. He took the name because he liked the paintings, and he spent his whole life with the name Johnny Roselli. But because the FBI was investigating him and they were following him almost every day, they learned about his alias, and that his real name was Filippo Sacco. And so they moved to deport Johnny and to avoid being deported out of the United States. Johnny indicated that he would be willing to talk about the attempts to kill Castro, but he also indicated that he knew something about who killed JFK. Whether or not that was true or not, we don't know, because eventually Johnny wound up in being killed himself, and he was stuffed into a 55-gallon barrel in Florida, buried in the water, and because of the rotting of his body in this 55-gallon bottle. Drum. It came up to the surface, and some fishermen found it. And the cops were called, and they realized the body was that of Johnny Roselli, who was supposed to testify before the Senate. And this was a front-page story in the New York Times when Johnny was killed. And there was a lot of concerns about was there some really deep secrets about the CIA, about the killing of JFK, and about the Mafia's involvement in all of this that had it's now dead with Johnny Roselli. And so that's towards the end of the book of Mafia Spies. Who is the last man standing in all of this story? Well, there's two last men standing. One is Santo Trafficante, the double agent, the mafia guy down in Florida. He winds up living to a ripe old age. And the one who lives the longest is the target of all of this, Fidel Castro. And Castro winds up dying only a few years ago as an old man in his sleep.
Did you uncover any overlap between these exiled Cubans, CIA-trained and organized crime figures, and the JFK assassination? Or maybe that's for the next book or the next series.
Yeah, I've done enough investigations as an investigative reporter. In fact, I spent a whole year one time on 360 murder cases, and
wow.
As a reporter for Newsday. And one of the things I learned very early on is that if you don't solve a murder within 72 hours, you usually are not you're gonna have a very hard time finding out who did it. And in the case of JFK, when people have asked me who killed JFK, the simple answer is Oswald and whoever else may be involved, we'll never know. We just don't know who may have been behind the killing of JFK, because Oswald was killed himself within a short period of time. And so, I did look at the involvement of the Cuban exiles. In fact, for the Paramount show, we interviewed Felix Rodriguez,
oh, really?
who's now in his 80s, I believe. And he told us the story about being an assassin trying to kill Castro. But whether or not there were any Cubans involved with the murder of JFK, I think we'll never know for sure.
I believe Felix Rodriguez is the one who called Che Guevara and allegedly has his hands in his freezer. Did he show you the hands?
No, he didn't. But we went to a museum that the Cuban exiles have in Florida, and we filmed Felix there. In fact, he showed me all around. That didn't make the cut in the TV show, but we did the interview with Felix. Definitely did. And I'm a big commentator in the show. There's a lot of people in the Paramount show, I should mention. People like Chris Matthews, the NBC commentator and historian of the Kennedys. There's a number of different people involved in it. Historians like Tim Weiner, who wrote the book about the CIA. T.J. English, who's written about the whole Cuban scene and the Miami scene as well. James Kaplan, who wrote the two-part biography of Frank Sinatra. He's in that. There's a number of different people who are in the show, and there's also recreations, as I mentioned, on the Paramount lot. So it really comes alive in the 6-part Paramount Plus documentary that comes out in July, first on Paramount and then on Showtime.
Okay, we're talking to Thomas Maier. He's the author of Mafia Spies, the inside story of the CIA, Gangsters, JFK, and Castro. And you could find him on on Twitter at Thomas Maier Book, and his website is Thomas Maier Books, Maier. And this Paramount series is coming out on July 16th, the 6-part series. Then it'll be on Showtime. I just noticed this is a documentary series. I thought it was a fictionalized novel that was going to be the series.
Well, actually, we started to try to do it as a drama.
Okay.
Kind of like Masters of Sex, but it was impossible to do during COVID. So it became much, and actually I think it works really well as a docuseries. So there's a number of different experts who talk about the story. I'm kind of the person that moves the story along. So you see me quite a bit in this series as well. But there's a number of recreations, and there's a lot of film footage from that time period. We did a lot of film research for this as well. So there's a lot of unique things that are in this story. But I also think that the recreations are really, really good. Sometimes they don't always work in some of these shows, but this works really well. They put a lot of money into it at Paramount. So, and in fact, the fellow who plays Johnny Roselli, Nick Annunziata, I believe his name is. He was a character in The Sopranos, and there's actually 3 clips from The Godfather that are in Mafia Spies on Paramount. So I think this is a really good lineage. I think our bona fides as far as the mafia and about organized crime are pretty good because of these connections to The Sopranos and The Godfather.
Real quick though, what did Chris Matthews contribute to this?
Well, Chris has written quite a bit about the Kennedys.
Yeah.
And the person who he's written about quite a bit among the Kennedys is Bobby Kennedy. And Bobby Kennedy, who was the Attorney General for his brother, JFK, after the Bay of Pigs, Jack Kennedy asked Bobby, even though he was the Attorney General, to kind of oversee what was going on down in Florida with the CIA. So in a way, he became like the CIA head, particularly in regards to what was going on in Florida and attempts to overthrow the Castro regime. And so Chris Matthews talks quite a bit about that in the show.
Okay, and then when you go to Amazon here and you look up the book here, the Mafia Spies, the inside story of the CIA, Gangsters, JFK, and Castro by Thomas Maier, you mentioned kompromat. What kind of a blackmail kompromat were they using? How does that fit into all this?
Kompromat is the phrase that the Russians have used. That's a Russian phrase, but fundamentally it's using sexual compromises of an individual to get them to help in a spy operation or any type of intelligence operation. And so in this story, arguably the mafia uses the awareness of JFK's relationship, his 2-year illicit relationship with Judy Campbell, as kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card, or at least that's what they think. They think because they supported Sinatra, and Sinatra supported JFK in the election of 1960, and also because they now found out about JFK's girlfriend and everything, that they had one over on the President of the United States and felt that somehow the Justice Department would go easy on them, which was just the opposite of what happened. Bobby Kennedy decided to really go after the mafia. But that was the aspect of sexual compromise was certainly there. And the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, when he found out about this affair that JFK was having with Judy Campbell, it was in there actually was a private meeting between Hoover and JFK about it. And JFK, after that meeting, severed all of his ties to Judy Campbell. So, that's a big part of it. There's also the CIA used another person, a young person who had an affair with Castro, and they gave her poison pellets to somehow go back to Cuba, visit Fidel Castro, and attempt to poison him. And so there's a scene that's recreated both in the Paramount TV show, but it's also explained in detail in my book, Mafia Spies.
You're talking about Maria Lorenz.
Yes, exactly.
A small world. A good friend of mine, A.J. Webman, who wrote the book Coup d'etat in America, had, until Maria Lorenz died, had Thanksgiving dinner with Maria Lorenz every year. They're a small group of JFK assassination fanatics. How does Marilyn Monroe fit into all this?
Well, Marilyn Monroe was introduced to Johnny Roselli very early on in her career. And what I indicate in Mafia Spies is that Johnny Roselli's, as a fixer for Columbia head Harry Cohn, somehow prevailed on Harry Cohn to put Marilyn in a couple of productions. The other thing is that Johnny dated Marilyn Monroe early in her career. Johnny lived in a place called the Garden of Allah, which is kind of like this condo complex where a lot of young actresses lived in the Hollywood area. This is right after the war in the late 40s, early 50s. And this is where Johnny met Marilyn Monroe. He also met Judy Campbell there, and Judy Campbell was married to an actor, but it was a very tumultuous relationship. She divorced, and when she divorced, she started going out with Johnny Roselli. And so Johnny traveled in this circle of young actresses like Marilyn Monroe. There's also another woman who is in the Paramount show who was friendly with Marilyn Monroe, and she talks about Johnny Roselli and just how handsome he was and how he courted all of the young actresses in Hollywood during that time period.
Okay, once again, we're talking to Thomas Maier. Mafia Spies, the inside story of the CIA, Gangsters, JFK, and Castro. If you go to Amazon, you'll see he's already got almost 5 stars, 4.5 stars, 4 3/4. Out of 437 reviews, and the book's not... That's pre-orders, that's pre-sales, Kindles. That's not even shipped books yet. So you can tell it's going to be a hot seller once again, just like that sex... What was that thing they're called again?
Masters of Sex,
which
was on Showtime.
What was that about?
That was the story of Masters and Johnson.
Oh, yeah, I got to have you back about that. That's fascinating stuff, too, as well. Listen, Thomas Maier, we're out of time. We got about 1 minute. What would you like to leave us with?
Well, like I said, the show is going to be on Paramount Plus on July 16th, and it was really fascinating to see how a TV show is made. I had that experience with Masters of Sex, but it's also interesting to see when they were putting together Mafia Spies for Paramount. I was interviewed at an old speakeasy restaurant in Manhattan for 3 days, so I got a lot of experience in terms of telling the story and telling it succinctly. And it's a complicated story, but it really is great to see when your book becomes a TV show, what they decide to put in and all the decisions that are made about that. And it turned out great. They're really thrilled about it at Paramount. It's going to be 6 parts that they're going to be dropping on Paramount Plus, and then on July 23rd, I believe, Showtime will start showing it as well, and it's 1 episode at a time over the next 6 weeks. So hopefully it will be the summer of Mafia Spies.
Gotcha. Yeah, the book comes out now. They got the series. They got the Showtime. Thomas Maier, thank you so much. I really appreciate this great content here, my friend.
Thank you so much, Ed, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Had a great time.
You too. Good night.
Take care. Bye-bye.